Hi, my name's Phil Hebert. I'm standing here in downtown Wilmington, North Carolina, to invite you to join me on an odyssey around the world with the end purpose of doing our small part to save this quaint little port city and countless others like it around the globe. I live less than a dozen miles upstream from here on the banks of this Cape Fear River, which runs behind me. This has been my adopted hometown ever since I left the Army after helping to liberate Kuwait during the first Gulf War. I met my wife here, and she is a native of the city, and then returned to college to complete my Bachelor of Science degree in laboratory medicine before embarking on a 30-year career in the laboratory and selling into the life science marketplace. This historic town, much like Charleston, South Carolina to the south of us and Savannah, Georgia behind that, has lots to love with beautiful river walks and antebellum architecture, and they were the gateways to colonization of the Southeast by immigrants from Scotland and Ireland and many other European countries. I was standing here in this general area a number of years ago when I realized something. Some of the cobblestone streets over here to my left had been roped off for repairs because of a particular high tide coinciding with heavy rains that flooded this entire downtown area, something that's happened many times over the years. I realized at that time that not only had it been happening more frequently, but becoming more and more severe, tearing up the roads and all. In my travels since that time, I have seen similar situations around the globe, most recently in the port city of Cartagena, Colombia, whose ancient streets that have survived for centuries since being colonized by Spain are now being inundated by high tides, with the roads there frequently becoming almost impassable. Living here, we also see periodic news clips showing yet another beach home that's fallen into the ocean as the ocean encroaches on the low-lying lands of the Outer Banks to our north. And we get news of communities spending insane sums of money on beach renourishment projects and sea walls to combat erosion of our shores, all the while knowing that it's like using $1 billion Band-Aid that will require replacement next time it gets wet, metaphorically speaking, of course, as those are very temporary fixes. What I have personally witnessed here is no anomaly, and by no means anywhere near as extreme as what they are experiencing in Cartagena and in Florida and so many other places around the globe. When you become aware of a problem like this and really start to pay attention to news from the world of climate science, you realize that it all tells a similar story. We've seen things like the enormous ice shelf like the Larsen B falling into the ocean, and doomsday glaciers like the Thwaites Glacier, which is roughly the size of Florida and half a mile thick, sliding ever faster year after year until it likely falls into the ocean, which will raise sea level by feet or even meters at a time. People stroll across these parks and eat dinner in these restaurants blissfully unaware that one day in the not too distant future, unless we stop warming our oceans, all of this is going to disappear under the waves. In fact, if climate change continues barreling towards its ultimate endpoint and the poles melt in their entirety, sea level rise will one day inundate all the land for many, many miles inland from here. And many states like Florida and most of the southeastern United States will be relegated to history as a place that formerly existed but which disappeared under the waves, like the mythical lost city of Atlantis. The water in this spot right here will be at 180 feet over my head. That's right. There'll be no more Disney World, no Miami, no New Orleans. All of that's going to be gone forever. And if people care, and I'm sure they do, why aren't there demonstrations in the street? Why isn't everyone up in arms about this slow motion calamity? The answer, as I'm sure you can guess, is a mixture of, well, I didn't know that. It won't affect me personally. That could be hundreds of years down the road. And among those who do know and do care, there'll be a lot of hand-wringing as they ask themselves exactly what would I do? What can I do that would make a real difference? And that's a legitimate question. Well, I have an answer to that question and others. And it includes things like, yes, it will affect you. And in fact, it likely already is, especially if you're already paying the exorbitant increase in home and especially flood insurance, which has soared about 50% in recent years around here. And although it is indeed likely to take decades or centuries for the very worst effects of climate change to be fully realized, this generation we live in now, us, we will be the ones remembered as the ones that decided to let much of the world as we know disappear beneath the waves, or else be known as the generation that said, this world as we know it is worth saving for future generations. These cobblestone streets, these historical old buildings, the soft sand beaches across the way, they're all worth saving. In fact, I bet almost everyone listening knows a favorite place or has a cherished memory of a place that will be inundated if the Ross ice shelf falls into the ocean tomorrow, as it is likely to happen. It could happen within 5 years. A whopping 30% of the population of the entire world lives at risk of being displaced by the most severe manifestations of the rising tide. But that's only the tip of the iceberg, as they say, because everybody the world over is going to have to compete for the diminished landmass at higher elevations. Moreover, the warming oceans continue to power more and more larger and ever more powerful tropical storms across seasons now extending from spring to late fall. We just set a record a little while ago for the earliest formed Category 5 hurricane in recorded history. Even those who live on higher ground and feel safe, well, they're going to face drastically higher risk of forest fires and the cost of fighting them. A study just published yesterday purports to show that the average American born in 2024 can expect to pay over $500,000 in taxes and insurance alone to cover the cost of fighting global warming. That same amount invested in an index fund in equal increments over a career, over a 45-year career, would turn into $11 million by retirement. So it follows that the inverse is true, that if we do not check global warming, it has the potential to do the reverse and turn a nation of would-be millionaires into retired paupers. That's why we should all care about this particular problem at this particular moment in time. The effects of this particular disaster will not only touch us and the lives of our immediate families, but all of our descendants in a decidedly more serious way. You might wonder then, how would what we do now have an effect on the world decades or centuries in the future? Well, the warming we see so far is most pronounced in the oceans and near the poles, and much more dramatic warming near the poles is already causing the permafrost in the vast frozen tundra of the north of Canada and Russia to melt, and that's releasing disastrous quantities of methane that's trapped in them. Methane is a much more potent greenhouse gas than CO2. So scientists predict we will reach a tipping point in the next few decades, after which warming can no longer be stopped or reversed just by cutting carbon dioxide emissions alone. And beyond that point, destruction of all our coastal cities and beaches will sadly become an inevitable fate. I'm encouraged by the recent worldwide climate accords and other voluntary measures taken by the entire world community to curb CO2 emissions. And that is a huge step in the right direction. But thus far, it has only decreased the rate of growth and not reversed it yet. Some people think my goal is a futile one, but that's silly, because there's 8 countries already succeeded in achieving carbon neutrality. The world's largest solar program just went online, and all by itself, that one solar field can meet the electricity needs of a small country. In just 10 years, the world has gone from 19% renewable energy to 30%. And that small change has slowed the rate of carbon buildup to put us almost to the point where CO2 levels are static and level. Another 10% reduction in fossil fuel consumption may just well be enough to cause temperature trends to move in the other direction and come down. But, the front runner in our current presidential election withdrew us from that pact and vows to do it again. So this is clearly not the time to take our foot off the gas pedal. We have to push the pedal to the metal, accelerate this positive trend if we're ever going to reverse it. And I think I have the idea, just the idea to do that, for now and in the future. To become part of the solution, we have to do a few things. We have to educate people on the dangers we face and the legacy we're leaving to our descendants on a local level, on a level that they care about, and move them to action. We have to build a financial war chest and have a concrete plan to move the world community to fight this problem and put an end to it for good. To that end, I've set up a GoFundMe campaign to cover the administrative costs of establishing a 501c3 tax-deductible charity that I want to call Rage Against the Rising of the Tide. You may recognize that. It's a nod to a line in one of my favorite poems by Dylan Thomas, in which the author urges us not to go gentle into that good night, but to rage against the dying of the light. It seems to convey an appropriate sentiment that correlates to what I'm talking about today. This 501c3 charity that I am forming will be a vehicle to fund a foundation that will raise funds in ways similar to the March of Dimes and the American Diabetes Association's Tour de Cure charity bike rides, so people will be able to do something to show they care by sponsoring charity walks and rides in the very lands that we're seeking to save. But I want this to be a worldwide movement, and to do my part in promoting this effort on a very limited retirement budget, I have already bought a cabin on the Bellevue Odyssey cruise ship, the world's first truly affordable live-aboard cruise ship, which promises to transport me to 1,275 ports in 147 countries over the next 15 years, and potentially longer, which will put me within spitting distance of all the world's continental coastlines over the course of those 4 circumnavigations of the globe. And in order to generate, maintain, and sustain publicity for this effort, I will personally join every charity walk and bike ride the world over until I have walked or ridden a distance equal to the length of these coastlines that we're trying to protect, or die trying. In other words, I am dedicating the balance of my life to serve a cause, and I want you to join me when I enter a port near you, or anytime between now and then. And if everyone in the world who cares about our shores steps up to save them, the moneyed interest blocking truly meaningful progress in this fight against global warming will be silenced once and for all. If you want to know my end game for this charity, I'll describe it like this. Everybody knows the Nobel Prize Committee and what it does, right? They distribute, it's really kind of a tiny sum of money, equivalent to a little over $1 million a year to each award recipient. And yet it has undeniably changed the world, as countless individuals around the world have been motivated to pursue the fame, notoriety, and yes, even the financial award of winning a Nobel Prize in their fields. Well, I personally think it is a high time that we do the same thing for those people who are doing the most to save the world as we know it. This would include awards to scientists who make the most profound advancements in technology with the end goal of reversing climate change, to investors who risk the most in implementing those changes, to legislators who take up the flag to rally support for the movement, to governments that establish and enforce the most beneficial environmental policies, to non-governmental organizations, NGOs, that advance our agenda. And yes, even world leaders who do their most to save their own shores locally. The fate of our world may be in our hands now, but it isn't written yet. There are at least a couple of decades left to change our fate. And what you and I do between now and then will decide which way we go. So the final answer to that question of what can you do personally to make a difference? Well, you could support my GoFundMe campaign to kick off this 501c3 charity and allow me to hire people who can accelerate the social marketing of the idea. You can set up a local chapter of this organization in your backyard or on the shores that you love and that you want to save for future generations. Or you can just follow my trek around the globe and have fun getting to know the 99% of shores that you almost surely don't already know in person, until such time as you do have the funds or the free time to join me in my crusade. You can follow my charity's blog on YouTube or Instagram, and you can share my message with everyone you know and encourage them to do the same by liking the video, forwarding it to people you know. If you believe that this is a worthwhile goal, then please step up and play a small part in this effort, and you'll feel good about yourself for doing so for the rest of your life. And from the bottom of my heart, please accept my thanks for doing whatever you may choose to do to help me in this campaign. Thank you.